Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are in the world. This is Jake Bernardes again with Risking It All, and I am in sunny Salt Lake City today. I'm speaking at SaintCon in about an hour or two, which is one of my favorite conferences, mainly because we don't sponsor it, so I don't have to do anything as a vendor, but partly because I'm speaking on SOC 2 is good security. I dare to disagree, and I'm sure lots of people will disagree. Two potential problems today. There is a sunlight that is quite bright and making me look slightly angelic, which is either good or bad, depending on how you look at it. And secondly, I'm on a Wi-Fi being run by a security conference, which means it could lead to all kinds of chaos. We'll see how it goes. My guest today is Adam Arellano, currently the security lead, VP, CISO, whatever title he's currently holding at Traceable, has a whole host of interesting parts of his background, and I am looking forward to chatting all things with him. Fascinating guy, I'm sure you will agree. Without further ado, let's bring him on. Adam, hello and welcome. How are you?
Pleasure to be here, Jake. And I'm doing well. I will have to point out that you're not in Salt Lake. You're in Provo.
Oh, getting very geographically specific. Fine. I'm in this. Oh, I'm not even in the Salt Lake Valley, am I? So I'm not. Oh, yeah.
No. Yeah. See, as a University of Utah grad in Salt Lake, I would never let somebody get away with saying that they're in Salt Lake if they're in Provo.
Although you're a University of Utah grad, but you appear to have BYU hair colors.
That's bad. Valid.
Good. Well, thanks for joining me. Like I said, Wi-Fi could be interesting. There's always a risk attaching yourself to the Wi-Fi security conference, and who knows who will try to do what to me. But let's see what happens. I think without further ado, let's give yourself a quick introduction on who you are, where you work, and then the three questions I always ask: who is your hero? What is your hobby? And what is the biggest risk you ever took? And to give you some context, well, I always say my hero is Alexander Hamilton. We can delve into that if you want to. It's an interesting one for a Brit. My hobby is spending time on my bike or running on my feet. And my biggest risk I ever took was probably having children. And it continues to be a risk, but I don't have as many as you. Yeah, go ahead. Give yourself an intro.
Yeah. So the short version of me is that currently I'm a technology advisor at Traceable, which is an API security company. I was previously a customer, but believe in them a lot. I'm also advising a couple other customers or a couple other companies. Previously was VP Enterprise Cyber at PayPal. Before that, at a foster care and adoption startup, which was where my passion was. And prior to that, AI company, Salesforce, and 14 years as a Marine. My hero, that's a good one. I'm gonna have to say, because she's not listening, my wife, who I refer to as the boss lady.
I've seen that in places.
Everywhere that I've ever been in training, as far as the Marine Corps goes, she's done the same thing, weighing about half as much as I do and about a foot shorter, and complaining much less and looking better doing it. So she's impressive. And I always tell people, like, thank her for her service because she did good things. I just kind of mouthed off and played around. So that's that. As far as my biggest risk was probably as a pacifist in early 2002, joining the Marine Corps to try and make a difference was a pretty big risk. And it worked out enough, but it was a strange one for somebody that didn't believe in violence.
You were 14 years in the Marines as an actively outspoken pacifist.
I was.
That is fascinating. Okay, right. Let me ask the hobby question. I'm coming back to that.
The hobby question. I've got 6 kids. That's about
so that's
it.
Your hobby.
Yeah, I do that, and I try and make money so they can all eat something at some point. And that takes most of the time.
All right, let me come back to the Marines. So 14 years pacifist. You said you joined to make a difference, but you obviously stayed way longer than your initial time because you didn't sign up for 14 years. So what kept you there? And give me like a kind of really quick lessons learned from that, because that journey sounds fascinating.
Yeah, it was an interesting play as a very sure of myself 22-year-old to go join the Marine Corps. My intent was to go get as much authority as I could get. so that I could be in front of as many people as possible, in front of many Marines as I could, and then make sure that they were in a situation where they could make good decisions about violence. And it was, whether I prepare them well to know the rules of engagement and to not, shoot at things they didn't have to, whether it was to train hard with them so that they would be able to perform well in dangerous situations. But I stayed as long as I could to try and make the most difference I could. And when I felt like that started to slow down and I couldn't, that's when I decided it was time for me to leave. My wife stayed in for 20 years, retired, and I kind of followed her around. But I think my time to be there to make a difference ended after about 14 years for sure.
How was that message received? Because look, I've met multiple Marines in my life, and they all very different in terms of where they came from, who they are, how they function, how they think. But there are quite a lot who join the Marines with the intent of just like wanting to go and wreak havoc on the world, right? So in that kind of scenario, how did the message resonate?
Oddly, when I especially as I gained more and more rank and became more of an authority figure, nobody knew exactly what to think about me. I didn't have blue hair at the time, but you could kind of see it through my personality that I would if I could have had blue hair. And people just didn't know what to think because I don't know if it comes across quite well now, but I just didn't care what anybody else was there was for. I didn't really care what the mission necessarily was. I was there for my Marines and to try and help them. And that came through, which made me a really good Marine in some ways, but in other ways it made me a terrible Marine because I wouldn't toe the line. If I thought something was messed up or wrong, I would say it, which isn't what you do in an authoritarian kind of scenario. But it got me to where I needed to be, where I could be a platoon commander and then a company commander, that I led Marines into Afghanistan, into war. And I came back with all of those Marines. Not all of them made the transition back very well, but all of them made it back from Afghanistan. Yeah, feed those babies. Thanks, CC.
That's an accomplishment in itself, right? It's not losing it. Interesting. Where else were you?
Mostly in training. I spent 6 years total, almost 7 years total of those 14 in training because I was doing some really complex working on F-18 targeting systems when I was enlisted as an officer. I did like a computer science degree in about 6 months. It was super painful. Did a lot of cybersecurity training. All of those things were just training and training and training, getting physically ready. Another weird story, became an MMA cage fighter for a little while. Wanted to see if I could actually.
Of course you did.
I mean,
today's conversation was going to be uncovering how many things I don't expect to hear.
that might be part of it. But I did that because I wanted to know if I could actually perform in combat or not. And that was the closest I could get without actually being in combat. But I mean, I was stationed everywhere. We moved 17 times before we landed in Charlotte. So we've been around. But Afghanistan was the one place that was not good.
I can more than imagine. It's obviously something meaningful to you because I've just seen your hat over your left shoulder.
Yeah,
the cap. So it's obviously something which is meaningful to your history. Cage fight. I'll move on in a second. We'll talk about security. But like I said, I have no written agenda to these things. I don't really care where we go. And people want to turn off, they can turn off. But cage fighting, like I've been in fights in my life. I grew up in places where people did, right? And that's a reactive situation where you often you react to what's going on and you have to kind of put your hands up and defend yourself. But stepping into a closed door where you know there's only really one way out, how scary is that the first time?
So in contrast to you, I had never tried to hit anybody and cause pain.
Oh, wow. And then went straight into MMA.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I spent 3 months training as hard as I could. I was training like 8 hours a day, going for 3 months, but still wholly unprepared. But I was there to establish whether or not I could put myself in that situation, stay in the situation, stay alert, and actually attempt to be effective. And so it was, it was interesting in that way. I did not build a SOC. I was running a SOC, but I didn't build one. But I think I did well. And it was before that even that I had built an ability to be in dangerous emergency situations and keep my head on straight. So I was actually thinking and actually processing the entire situation as opposed to being in a fight or flight response. I was pretty much present
It makes sense. So, marine to cyber. Now, I work with a lot of Israelis, as lots of us do, who have this natural transition from kind of their military service straight into cybersecurity because it's what most of them did in the military. You didn't predominantly. Like, it sounds like it was part of it, but not the whole role. So, how did you end up going from that to like cybersecurity roles?
So when I became an officer, I became a communications officer.
Okay.
Not too long after, I tricked my wife into marrying me. She got by name requested by a general to be a aide, and at the same time they were like, "Oh, well, she's married to this clown," and they were like, "Well, okay, bring him with you, but put him in the basement." The basement happened to be Marine Corps Recruiting Command, and like literally, I walked in and they were like, "Oh, we weren't expecting you. We have a cybersecurity need. We need somebody to run the national cybersecurity program for Marine Corps Recruiting Command, which is a civilian military hybrid network." And I was like, okay, sure. And so they shoved a CISSP in my face, and I, got it in like 3 or 4 weeks or whatever. And that was the beginning of it. And I spent my whole time at MilGrade, Marine Corps Recruiting Command, like 3 years worth, trying to get us into the cloud because that was the only way we were going to survive. But it didn't work.
I don't think I've heard some interesting traversals into cybersecurity in my life. I don't think I've ever heard my wife got a job and they needed to find something for me to do. And that's how I ended up in cybersecurity.
It was
Well,
literally it.
that's different, but I like it, right? You never look back. That's kind of where you ended up. Okay,
Yeah,
cool. Let's go into some news topics.
sure.
Hopefully I gave you some kind of rush on this, but last time I can't remember who it was. So if they're still in the chat or on today, then remind me and ping me. But someone asked to talk about the Snowflake breaches. I don't know why with specificity. For those who don't know, obviously Snowflake got breached, and therefore, because they're a database and they underpin pretty much a good portion of the Fortune 500, there was all kinds of data that was lost. There's also this kind of argument around whether it was them who got their credentials compromised. They turned around and said it wasn't us. It was a third party credentials compromised, had access to our systems, which again puts a whole other spin on like, is the victim company able to defend themselves by blaming somebody else when they can't actually prove it? I don't know. What are your thoughts on Snowflake? What are the takeaways?
Wow. And you had mentioned that we wanted to discuss this, so I was digging through it again. I dug through it when it originally happened, but there are a multitude of responsible parties who have failed to take responsibility effectively before the breach and after the breach. So there are things that Snowflake could have done that could have prevented this, like forcing their customers to have MFA.
Yep.
But their customers all had security programs. You don't own a Snowflake instance. You're not a Snowflake customer if you don't have a security program. And if your security program doesn't require MFA for you to get to sensitive topics, then like, man, you're kind of holding the bag too. So, Snowflake could have done more. The customer could have done more. And then
Do
the
you think,
third
wait,
party.
go back on that. Go back on that 1 second, because sorry to interrupt, but go back. So I'm with you. I kind of looked at this and went, it's harsh blaming Snowflake because some of this is the customer's fault. I'm like, but can Snowflake actually enforce that their customers use MFA? Can we get to a point, you think, where a vendor can say, you know what, you can't use my application unless you have good security. If you choose to use crap security, there's no access.
Yeah, I mean, there's precedence for that. Salesforce did that 3-4 years ago.
It's not in the same way, though, is it? It's not in the same way that Snowflake would
Right.
require it, because it's like actually it's the data lake behind it that they've got access to.
Right. But I hear you, like that. Can they do that? Yes, they can do that. But will it cost their bottom line? Also, yes. Will it make it difficult for some of their customers? Also, yes. But it's objectively better for them. The American medical system is a very great example of not doing that, where they'll treat the symptom and treat the symptom and treat the symptom, but not require that you make changes that are actually going to help you. Yeah, it's still the individual's personal choice to continue drinking a gallon of whatever soda every day, sure. But also the American medical system kind of encourages that and doesn't provide them with the necessary tools to actually get out of that scenario. So like my thing is like anybody that points, any end user that points at Snowflake and says you did something wrong and you should have done better, cannot like they can't abdicate themselves from responsibility of having been in the same spot. They both got owned and they're both responsible.
I agree. Before I interject, you go into vendor risk. Let's carry on that one.
The most secure network and system in the world is one that's not connected to everything. And
Agreed.
right now, there's no such thing. There's not many things that we as a society use that aren't built almost entirely off of API calls. It used to be that you would write a bespoke program that had its own, relationship to the database. The application layer would talk to the database in a very specific way with business logic. That's gone. Almost everything is API centric, and this is not a plug for Traceable whatsoever, but this is why I pay attention
You
to
can
Traceable.
plug if you want. It's fine. You go ahead.
Well, let me sit up. I've got a API security T-shirt on.
There we go.
But the reason why I started paying attention to Traceable and I wanted to work with them is because that is the connective tissue that connects everything on the internet, on mobile, on anywhere you can think of, and nobody's looking at it. And everybody knows that it works, but nobody understands how it works. It's a lot like your ligaments. Everybody understands muscles. Kind of, my muscles are big, they work well. My muscles are not big, maybe they're faster. You come to a certain age where you start to understand that your ligaments are there too, and they actually do a pretty important thing of holding your muscles to your bones. And if you don't pay attention to those and take care of them, then you end up, with a torn ACL when you're 35 after playing soccer, which no experience whatsoever there, but it's kind of a wake up. And that's what we're not paying attention to as a security culture, is how important the API is to the infrastructure of the internet and, all technology.
Yeah, like I talk a lot about how I think we used to build like homes custom, right? And we don't anymore. Like you have this kind of configuration. It's particularly prevalent in the US where you like choose great room from A, B, and C. Choose like kitchen, like choose master suite, and they all kind of just put them together. I kind of think that's how we build technology now, right? We don't really. No one builds custom code really. Like you use it to thread third-party existing components together and the odd like bit of functionality to kind of put the magic sauce on, but that one's like ultra true. And then like the hyper connectivity we've got ourselves into now. I think it's Bruce Schneier wrote the book Click Here to Kill Everybody, which is like really
I think he just got Wi-Fi'd. I don't know if that's me or him, but he's frozen. Or is it me that's frozen?
It's definitely Jake, but I think he's back now, so I'll
jump out. He is back. Okay.
Panic over.
So Jake is somewhat frozen, so I'll keep going until we find him, and then if you could just message me and let me know, Simon, when we have him back fully. He was just going to go into a long compliment about how cool he thinks I am, but maybe he's back.
Am I back now? Can you hear me?
Yeah, you are.
Oh, okay. I said there's a risk to always being on like live Wi-Fi security conference, and my point was proven. This is what happens when you rely on it. But no, I think that's right. So let's part the Snowflake one. I agree. I think it's a super complicated issue, and there's so many people that needed to take blame more than did take blame. BitDefender. So Microsoft got away with the CrowdStrike one very well, if I'm being completely honest. I think they were largely to blame for CrowdStrike's issues, but whatever, right? They got away with it. We'll ignore that. BitDefender and its links to Microsoft vulnerabilities came in the news this week. What do we think?
I have some good friends and a couple of heroes who have recently joined Microsoft to help as business information security officers. So basically like sub-CISOs to the CISO of Microsoft. And to put words in their mouth, I think part of what they're doing is they're trying to go in and fix some of what's wrong there. I have some opinions about the culture of Microsoft and the way that Microsoft builds, and mostly the way that Microsoft rewards success. To me, and BitDefender being part of that, it's super easy to be involved deeply with Microsoft's platforms and have issues because it's super complex, so complex, so big, so unwieldy that I don't think there's a single person in this earth who understands the entirety of what Microsoft is capable of, even just from a server perspective. Like I've known people who've worked in servers, in what used to be server, server infrastructure, which is now Windows Server infrastructure. People that have been in it for 35 years that don't understand it completely. And I'm not even talking about SharePoint. Like SharePoint's another one of those that has so much there that you can't figure it all out. That complexity works against itself. And so it's easy as a vendor or somebody who interacts with Microsoft or is part of it, it's very easy to run afoul of that complexity. And again, whose fault is it? Much like the CrowdStrike thing. Yeah, did CrowdStrike push something that took down a lot of servers? Sure did. Did it get pushed to an extremely fragile operating system that could get taken down by a couple zeros? Sure did. Like, those both have to be present. And so for me, when I evaluate software, when I evaluate vendors, what I'm looking for isn't necessarily isn't pure functionality. And it's the same when I'm dealing with startups. I'm not looking purely at their idea. Are they setting the conditions for success properly? Are they actually in a place where they can innovate safely? Are they in a place where their platform can be stable? Linux is the opposite end of that. Like, it's hardly usable from a amateur standpoint. Like, as an amateur, you can't just go in there and figure out what you're doing. But that means that its conditions for security are much higher and much more difficult to take down.
That's true, although trying to enforce a single secure image to your development team using Linux is possibly the hardest task that any security leader ever has. And trying to find an MDM that does anything on Linux is equally challenging, but that's a separate conversation. Last one that I think is worth debating. Has China broken military-grade security using quantum computers, or have they not?
It's a funny question. So if you know me and you've heard me talk long enough, you'll know that if I call something military-grade security, it's not a compliment.
Yeah, I tend to err with you that military-grade is not like a real measuring stick for how good encryption is.
No. And while I respect my brothers and sisters in arms in Fort Meade that work at NSA and do the cryptography thing, the speed at which their process does not run is not a compliment to what they're doing. So I'd have to say that it's possible China did something. Whether or not they actually did or not, we don't have solid evidence. The way that story was worded was intended to make a splash, which it did.
Yeah, definitely.
But it is a good reminder that there is only so long that our current state of security is going to stay the way it is now. We were just talking about, I was talking to another group, actually at a community college yesterday. I was doing a quick cybersecurity, like career day thing, and talking about zero trust, and then started talking about from zero trust, talking about AI. It was that the entirety of security was going to rely on zero trust because that's what was being pushed and sold. And then it all of a sudden became AI. So everybody that, vaped a lot and wore a snapback cap and was in Bitcoin, all of a sudden became AI masters. There's going to be something else that comes along. You just can't rest on your laurels about that. So whether or not they did, kind of irrelevant to everybody until it's proven. And, you do what you can to get post-quantum encryption figured out. But again, it's probably going to happen that we are on the wrong side of the bang when that does happen.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing I took from it actually wasn't to do with whether China did or didn't do it, because I don't really care. I think the interesting point was where they raised around the use of quantum, which again, it wasn't as surprising, but we talk about cloud, we talk about API, we talk about AI, we talk about blockchain, all these kind of cultural shifts that were supposedly going to change the world, and in this case, an AI are supposedly going to change it. I think quantum's the one. I think quantum is going to change the landscape of technology security completely and entirely forever once it's mass consumable and mass accessible.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, there's just no, you can look at the history of computing, the way that Moore's law has progressed, and understand that Moore's law is on steroids right now, headed towards quantum. And then once it hits quantum, it's going to be crazy. The CISO of Anthropic, Jason Clinton, likes to walk around and scare people about how much artificial intelligence is going to increase just based on the number of orders for GPUs that have been placed with the chip companies. By that metric alone, we're going to be at 50x the capability within 18 months to 2 years. That by itself is scary. If quantum comes into that equation, a whole different story.
I agree. And as a holder in a reasonable portion of stock in Nvidia these days, I hope it goes that way.
Yeah, let's all root
It'll
for
be
that.
a good day for me. So moving out of news into like the main topic. So today I want to talk about breaking norms and other things around that. And I've got to start with the first question. How much of it for you is intentional, right? You obviously have the blue hair. I see your nails are painted blue. Is this intentional to make a statement or a stance, or are you just being you? Or like, forgive me if it's an invasive question, but how do you get to the point that you're at? Like, where do you come from breaking the norm of whatever the norm of security is? Who knows what it is?
If you ask my little brother, and if you don't have a little brother, it's just somebody that always takes pot shots at you, right? If you ask my little brother, it's because I wanted to be a futurist and stop working so I could just say things. But you need crazy hair to be a futurist. According to him, that's my entire plan. I don't know that he's wrong.
I like it. You do get photographed at a lot of conferences. I mean, you got invited to B-Sides Cayman. Who else gets invited to the B-Sides in the middle of the islands in the middle of nowhere?
If this is the effect of it, then I'm going to keep doing it for sure. Yeah, so it's a good question. And there's a intentionality that I bring to the way that I land in a room that I've chosen to embrace. It's had negative effects on my career. I'll tell you that much right now. Like being openly queer, being openly not, gender non-binary, and looking like I do. I know that has closed doors for me. It's probably forced me out of a couple rooms, but and here's the real test if I can get through this without getting emotional. So my oldest, who is trans, a long time ago, I figured that out. And I started having arguments with people when they would say transphobic things, because if every time I had that argument, that was once that she didn't have to. And so for me, presenting myself as a genderqueer person, that, the way I describe myself is like a little bit chubby David Bowie, that just is a little bit like, not quite as fit as he was, but
any connection to David Bowie has got to be a good one. Probably one of the great legends and influences in musical history.
Exactly. Like the reason I am always this way, no matter what room I'm in, whether I'm in, I showed up to Capitol Hill like this. I've got pictures of, me with members of Congress like this, and hopefully other people soon, is because seeing me look the way I do, but also be extremely proficient at the work that I do, tells other people who on the inside are already here with me, like on the inside, this is who they are, but they're masking themselves so that they can exist in rooms and not get pushed out. I'm paving the way for them to be able to be themselves in ways that nobody really did for me. I've got a couple heroes that have been out and presented themselves as their true selves, like in the cybersecurity world, that paved the way for me. And I just want to further that. Like I can't say how important it is for other people to see themselves in leaders so that they know it's possible. And there's 12 different aspects of that about me that I try to present. Son of immigrant, my dad's Mexican, I'm half, genderqueer, former Marine, male dad who is not afraid to be feminine and not afraid to be, a dad to kids who are trans and non-binary and things like that. All of those things, if other people see them and recognize them in me, it might give them permission to be themselves, or at least to know they're not alone. And that was, since I figured out my daughter was trans, that's been like one of my main goals in my daily interactions with people.
So I'm going to continue to probe and let me know when I get uncomfortable, but that's kind of my nature. So,
good luck. We'll see who gets uncomfortable first, Jake.
So you talk about bringing your real self to work, and I'm all for that. But like, how much of you is your real self versus then also almost enhancing a character because you want to be that kind of, that almost like superhero for the community?
No, that's an amazing question. That is a great question. I don't think I have a good beat on that line. I don't think I know. I can tell you that some of my earliest, like some of the earliest times in my life where I look back and I'm like, oh, I should have kind of figured out that I was like not the normal standard, bro. Like, I remember the first time I put fingernail polish on and I was giddy for reasons I could not understand. Or in high school where like, we did some like cheerleading routine. And I got to put on a cheerleading skirt. And I was like, I have not been this happy ever in my life. You know, times where I like should have realized something was up, but I didn't. I've gone back to those moments and just embraced that. So same with hair color, things like that. There was a time in high school for like a pep rally or something. I colored my hair and I was like, this feels right. I do those kind of things. There's further that I could take it. Like every once in a while, if I have the time, I'll come onto a podcast or come onto a speaking event with full makeup on. I'll do that when I can, but I don't force it because it's just not possible always. But that's part of the fun about getting to be who you are, is that you don't have to be a static person and you can push into any direction you want, find out that it's not your direction and change.
It's interesting. You know Eddie Izzard, comedian out of the
Yeah.
UK?
Oh, yeah. Love Eddie.
So it reminds me, because he talks about this. He says, like, I'm never quite sure, like, if I am who I am because I am who I am, or I am who I am because I've chosen to be that. And it's like, it's this kind of blurred line between once you make a decision to actually promote and hold an image for a greater good, that you kind of blur the lines. And in an interesting way, completely flip. Like, I just watched a weird documentary on Vince McMahon of the WWE. And I mean, he's got all kinds of trouble, but the reason it kind of resonates is he talks about like how he created this character and then he almost became the character. And he couldn't actually get out of being the character. And I think it's fascinating. One thing you said that made me interested, you talked about being, if I look this way, then I demonstrate I'm really proficient, right? Do you think, and I've spoken to a lot of women in the industry, and to a lesser extent, but equally so, people of racial or different kind of ethnic diversities who say that they have to be more proficient to make up for who they are in the space. Do you think that being proficient is enough to make up for who you are? Or do you think you need to be more proficient? Or do you think there's an added requirement?
Rather than try to navigate this question gently, I'm going to kind of be blunt. I have 6 different kinds of privilege that most people don't. And so a woman or somebody who is not well represented in the cybersecurity community, they do exist in a place where they have to do that. I don't, which is a place of privilege. My team at Salesforce, when I was there, used to make fun of me because we would go into a tough meeting with the government and everybody else would be in suits and ties and I would show up in like a t-shirt, jeans, and a hat. But if I turn my Southern accent on, tell them a little story about the Marine Corps and the war, say something funny, and they would just like forget about everything that happened, because that's the kind of privilege that I can turn on and off. And it's the kind of code switching that I can do that I use to my advantage, but I use to the advantage of those who need that kind of privilege extended to them. So I don't have to do that. And that's a privilege that I carry. And it's a privilege that I use for others because it's something I don't deserve, but I have.
You're kind of like a true capability as a social comedian, right? You have the ability to relate to almost every group in the room in some way or form, which enables you. Yeah, you talk about it as privilege, but it's more different facets of your past and personality. Interesting. Let's carry on the diversity theme. So I think we get hung up on diversity being like a few things. It's your gender, it's your race, it's your sexuality, and then it's whether you'd look at then trans and various other forms of attach or associate tertiary to our gender. Do you think that's facilitating greater conversations? Do you think we're getting caught up in a very linear, very finite view of what diversity is? Because it's like you're very hard to pigeonhole. Like, let's be entirely frank and be brutal here. Like, it's like I wouldn't know where to put you. And I think that's almost like a freeing quality. Do you think we need to get to a point where diversity becomes just about the fact that the person is not the same as me, regardless of what makes them not the same as me?
Yeah, this comes back to the privilege conversation. We can back off of diversity, equity, and inclusion when everyone can walk into a room and carry the same weight based on their capabilities and not on any other aspect. When we get to that point, that's the right time to back off. The reason why I stick to that mantra, that desire to further the cause, is because there's still resistance for those in privilege of losing their privilege. There's nothing. I have a really good friend of mine who late in life figured out that she was trans, and so spent her whole life as this buff bodybuilding Marine that then figured out that she was trans. And we had a conversation about the fact that she used to be very anti like diversity, equity, inclusion because she had something to lose, which was the ability to walk into a room as a man and command presence and have her physicality be like currency in that room. And then she lost that. And she's like, I didn't know that level of privilege that I enjoyed until I lost it. And now she's on the back foot and has to do all the proving because not only is she a woman, she's also a trans woman that is like coming into her own of being, physically the person she wants to be. So like, I understand that it becomes tiring for people who enjoy privilege to constantly be faced with or have to talk about diversity, equity, inclusion. Imagine how difficult it is to not have the privilege to be tired of it. To always be your waking thing.
How are we going to know when everyone carries the same weight in the room? Like, how do we know when people all think that they are equal? Like, it seems a hard metric to achieve.
I don't think it's a hard metric to. I think the day that it happens, which may never come, human history says that it won't. The day that it happens, we will know. But in the meantime, our need to measure it or our need to put a time frame on it is an unhealthy part of the conversation. Like, how much longer do I have to be nice to you before you shut up? Or like, how much longer do I have to be like, how much longer do I have to say that I'm not racist before I actually have to stop being racist? Like that's the real question. Cause like, I had this conversation with one of my kids is her father's Black and her mom is Filipino. So she is a very different looking person than the other kids are because of her background. And we had to have the talk with her. Like, you need to be careful when interacting with figures of authority, especially police, because of the way you look. And her siblings will never have that experience. So that's how we know. And so like, yeah, you might be, maybe law enforcement is tired of hearing about that. But until my kid can interact with a police officer and not feel that fear, then we need to keep pushing at it. We need to keep going.
Let me ask an awkward question. Let me give some context to it. Do you think, and have you ever or suggested anyone gamifies diversity? Let me give some context. So I've hired a lot of pen tests in various roles in my time, and I've had 2 instances where I had female applicants who were fantastic, equally qualified experience to male counterparts, equally the same, right? And both counts, they said, I want more money than you're offering and more money than that person would get because I'm worth it from a diversity stance. And to me, I kind of almost got like a round of applause for them. So I was like, you've literally gamified the diversity requirements of our industry and technology. And I thought that was cool. Like, do you talk about that? Like, is that something that interests you? Do you think we should, or do you think that's also a dangerous game? Like, starting to play like, well, you need me, right?
It's a fun question. As soon as Harvard and Princeton on a resume don't equal more money and more access, we could talk about that. But I mean, I don't think I've done that, although I do hold privilege as somebody who is queer, but also Marine and stuff like that. I don't see anything wrong with that. I don't see, other people not mention the fact that they went to a certain school that matches with the school that, the interviewer went to.
It's so the same, right? It's playing the game of why, what's the benefit of having me? It's like, what have I got to sell? And if I don't have Harvard, Princeton, or an Ivy League school, what have I got that company needs? I've got gender, I've got race, I've got sexuality, I've got something else that they want because they need it in their HR portfolio.
Yeah. Well,
cynical or not.
Well, hold on. But it's not that they need it in their HR portfolio. It's that their experience as that particular demographic actually provides diversity of thought. And this is what
that's right. I agree with you entirely, but the reality is that the cynical side of me knows that a lot of the time people are effectively almost recruiting to a quota at times. And I think that's the game.
I don't think the numbers prove that out.
Go on.
I would say that like I understand that there's a fear of that. The numbers don't show that. If that
I
was
agree, the numbers
true,
don't show
then we
it.
would not have a diversity problem in cybersecurity. Like the top of the funnel, everybody that comes into cybersecurity, if diversity was like this chip that you could play and get in, then we would have a very different mix of people coming
But
into
is
the
the top of the funnel
industry.
equal, or is this a deeper problem that was rooted in how we educate at a young
Oh, yeah.
age to influence people into technology, STEM
Yeah.
subject? I mean, I don't think the top of the funnel is equal. So I agree with you that we're not equal in our company, but like kind of presentation of it. But I think that's down to the problem is the fact that when we go to recruit, there's not equality there to start with, so you can't choose many people. It goes
Correct.
to education for me, and the fact that, like I said, that it's hard to work out how you make it equal and the interest in what we do.
Yeah. Well, I don't think that if you try to go for equality, you might miss a lot more than if you try to go for true diversity of thought, true diversity of experience. That is a much easier game to play. And so that's why personally, I don't spend a lot of time at universities. Like universities are going to take care of themselves just fine. I go to community colleges and I go to certificate programs and I go talk all the time because those non-traditional students who are working full-time while going to a cybersecurity program for a 2-year certificate, they know things that some kid whose mom got him into Stafford, whose mom is going to get him into the Stafford master's program for CS, the day that kid, falls off the conveyor belt, they're not going to be as prepared as the kid that worked at, Starbucks to get his undergrad paid for. It's going to be two different people, two different skill sets. And I actually prefer to have the skill set of being able to work hard at something when the cards are stacked against you.
I mean, the latter is the qualities that often we try and recruit in security, right? It's when there's problems, can you work out to solve them? Like, can you hit your head on a wall until you work out what to do next? Like, under stress and pressure, can you respond? I was just talking, just before I got this call, to Nathan Cooper, who's the VP of Security at Lucid. And he was talking about how he's worked with the CEO who used to interview people by asking them in the interview process to drive them to the airport. I've got no time. This is the only time I've got. Going to the airport. And he would intentionally make it late so they were under pressure. Intentionally running in traffic times, so that then he put them in a position where they were trying to deal with the traffic, conscious of the fact they were making their new future boss late, and then dealing with the questions that were put on them. He put them under stress to see how they'd handle it. And I think when you go to the kind of non-traditional students or non-traditional backgrounds, full stop, it's people who haven't had to be better at dealing with adverse or challenging situations. And they've then got a skill set that you can't teach in Ivy League privileged schools. Not to say that they don't have a fantastic education there as well, but it's a different way of learning in a different system. That drives us to the next question, right? You have a user guide, which I read, and I have an ex-boss at one of my former companies who had a user guide. And I find this concept fascinating. I read yours. I liked it. Do you think everyone should have one? Do you think this is something we should all do? Should we all have a user guide that talks about how to deal with us well and less well, so that then people aren't responsible for the consequences? Well, they are responsible at that point for the consequences of our communications.
I don't use the word should any more than I have to, because it's.
Would it be better if people had one?
I would find it helpful if everybody that works with me read my user guide and gave me theirs. I would find that helpful. There's things in there that there's some people who take criticism really well. I think I take criticism really well. I respect people who criticize me in public. I also have this Swiss cheese memory for a lot of reasons, that I might promise to do something for you and then I might forget, and you need to know that I might forget, and it's okay to remind me. And then for me, I just added a section most recently on my user guide around ethics, because as a person who's now advising companies that are for profit, and some of those companies I have a vested interest in, it's important for me, for other people to understand where my allegiances lie. So if I do come at you and I want to talk to you about API security, you should know that I also work for and care deeply about a company called Traceable that is dealing in API security. So you as a person need to know that I have different interests than a pure conversation. And so to the question that InfoSec Clive is asking, I think it's important to provide basic information, methods of communication that are effective, methods of feedback. For me and for other senior leaders, I think having a section on ethics of where your allegiances lies is super important. And then also just some fun things that humanizes you. When I was at the company I was at that did this was called Binti, and it was a foster care and adoption startup. And we were this ragtag group of like social workers, hippies, and pirates that were trying to make a difference in the lives of these kids who were experiencing foster care. It was helpful for us because we were a very diverse group, that we knew who can handle confrontation, who can't, who can handle direct feedback, who needs written feedback, who prefers certain pronouns, who can hear about certain things or can be asked about certain things, and who can't. And it just made us interact in a more healthy manner. It's super helpful for me to have. So I encourage people who work for me to make one, but I tell people who work for me to read mine. So you could call it like I make them read that, because I think it's important that they know how to deal with me. I'm not easy to deal with all the time, so it's helpful.
Yeah, it was interesting. I said I've been thinking about a while about writing one. It's probably driven me to the point that I'm going to consider and post it. I like how accessible yours is too. It's not like I've seen before people share them as an email document, but yours is like kind of out there to anyone, right? It's not hard to find. Michael's question around companies, organizations being biased to recruitment. Michael, I'm going to park that because that is a deep, long question that we could go into a long time, whether there is a bias or whether there is not a bias, whether there's a bias just to kind of tip the cap to say that we have these kind of things. It's that could take up a lot of time and we don't have it. But I will come back to that question in a future podcast at some point. Adam, we could go all over. I've got a million questions, but I'm conscious of time. So I'm gonna. You said something which I thought was interesting. You talked about coming from a background where you worked as a social worker, counselling. You've got all kinds of like different soft skills that aren't traditionally, I suppose, in cybersecurity professionals, whatever traditional does or doesn't mean. Do you think that's a benefit, or do you think that's a relevance, or how does that come into play with who you are now as a security leader and advisor? Like, not many people I know who sit in our seats have been a social worker and a counselor and had that kind of experience.
Yeah, there needs to exist one or two of me, not a lot, like too much of me. And it's a bit much, right? In moderation. I've sat for interviews. There's a company that was a software company that was private equity headed towards IPO. And I sat in front of this interview panel that was pure software engineers. Every single one of them started as a software engineer, including like CFO, including others. And their feedback to me was, we're going to go with somebody else who's more technical. And I was like, it's an interesting choice. You've got a room full of technical people. You might need one person that knows how to hug. Like maybe you just need that, right? You might need one person that is an expert in conflict resolution, or that's an expert in communication in difficult situations. Maybe. But and I respect their choice. I was going to turn them down anyway. But like that was the feedback I got. And so you do need one of me. You need a lot more technical than you need social workers, but you need one. I just happen to be the one in most rooms, because you're right. There's not a lot of people that have gone through this. There are a lot of people that have really wild backgrounds who do an amazing job because of their wild backgrounds. But again, it can't be 100 former social workers in a room trying to make software, because the only thing you're going to get is like some pictures and family diagrams. And, that's as far as we go.
I like your point on the kind of like, you need someone in the room who can hug or do something that isn't technical, right? That we get this trapped world where it's like, I pen tested. So are you an ex-pen tester? I wouldn't describe myself as technical, because it's been so long and technology's moved so far that like, I'm like, what am I good at? I'm good at dealing with stress and pressure. Like that's my kind of niche. And like, if yours is the fact that you can give good hugs, right? The reality is that we have a world, and especially in the cyber world, where forgetting what we traditionally call diversity, we just need people to think differently.
Yeah.
Like, we need to be able to solve the problem from different angles and see it in different ways and think about it in different times and come from different family shapes. Like, we just need to be able to have a team which is different enough that we don't both see the same color when the color comes up on the wall.
Yeah. And honestly, like, I do have a technical background. Like I've designed entire data centers. I've, architected combat preparedness and combat communications AOs that span hundreds of miles. That's there. So you have to have that baseline of being able to speak and talk the language. But I've always told people that I mentor, it's great to be a perfect software engineer or great to be a perfect SOC analyst. But if you can't say that you're a SOC analyst and some other thing, you're not going to be as valuable as the SOC analyst who does that and also knows about compliance, or the software engineer who also has done UX training, or who has also done, accessibility training. Having an and after your title is going to make you more valuable, more useful to the group.
Yeah, it's that whole part that you are good at a lot of things and like, what was it, master of none? Like, I think that's the reality that we sell that often. People often describe that as being a negative quality. I look at it and go, that's great. Like I've said in a few podcasts before, when I go and hire and recruit, I rarely define technical or even like tertiary skill sets or like kind of competencies. I'll go, look, this guy, if he works for me still or if he doesn't, go talk to him and go find me people who think like he does, or can be complementary to how he thinks. Because in the end, I want people who I understand and can work with more than I want specific backgrounds and skill sets. Look, we could go on for another hour. This has been probably one of the most interesting ones I've done. So I hugely appreciate the time. Have you got any parting final thoughts while I put you on a soapbox that you would like to share with the audience and leave in the archives of time of YouTube forever?
Yeah. If you don't go vote, if you're in the United States and you don't go vote on November 5th or prior to it, I don't want to hear an effing word from you for the next 4 years. Like, this is like, don't thank me for my service. Don't thank me for being a Marine. Go vote. I didn't say who you need to vote for. There's a very particular person I hope you vote for, but I'm not telling you that. I need to guess. It's obvious. But I'm telling you, go vote. The one thing that we as Americans deserve is real terrible leaders if we're unwilling to participate in democracy. So if you're not willing to participate in democracy, you deserve a terrible leader. So don't. Go participate in democracy, go vote, and we can make it through this. That's all I want to say.
Adam, I cannot thank you enough. How we ended up on voting, from traversing through the annals of David Bowie, diversity, user manuals, and everything else in between, as well as going into some of the recent news and breaches. Thank you for your insights. I think this has been truly interesting and a different context and angle than I've been able to do before. So like I said, we may well have you on in the future, but I'm only truly grateful for your thoughts, your openness, and your willingness to share. So thank you again.
Yeah, been a pleasure, Jake. Thank you so much.
And to those who have listened, you know how to reach me. You can find Adam on LinkedIn. It's not hard. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to either of us. And I hope we hear from you all soon. Thank you. Have a wonderful day, evening, night. I don't know where you are in the world, but thanks. Simon, it's over to you to wrap it up and kill it.
Thank you.